Alright, let's dial this up for a second. Hey, did you know that Maryland almost had a NASCAR track outside Baltimore in the 90s? Well, it's true. I touched on this in another video, but like a whole lot of other places around the country around the 1990s and 2000s, there were a couple of proposals for racetracks around the Baltimore metro region. There was Essex International, which was going to be by Whitemarsh, then maybe the Key Bridge and some other places, etc., etc. And then there was Maryland Motorsports Park, which I'm going to focus on here. Here, actually, right here, a few miles west of Havre De Grace, which, if you're looking at a map, is pretty much right at the top of the Chesapeake Bay. Today, it's the grounds of the Bully Rock Golf Course and community, but that wasn't always the case. The year is 1994, and there are not a lot of options for road racing in the Mid-Atlantic region of the US. There's none, actually. So let's open up Google Earth here. There's Watkins Glen, which of course is all the way up in the Finger Lakes of New York. There's Virginia International, VIR, which is literally right on the border with North Carolina. It's very far south. And then there's Lime Rock up in Connecticut, also a pretty long drive away. Other than those, you're out of luck if you want to see racing near Washington, Baltimore, Delaware, Philly, a huge chunk of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So enter developer Richard Rothman. Again, it's 1994, and just west of Havre De Grace is a huge plot of land, the Blenheim Farm. It runs from Pulaski Highway, which is US Route 40, about halfway up the distance to I-95. Havre De Grace itself is a few miles east, and all of this is about half an hour northeast of Baltimore. If you've ever taken the Amtrak Acela train, this is the town that you ride over just before, or after, you've crossed the Susquehanna River. Rothman has his eye on the Blenheim property for his newest venture, Maryland Motorsports Park, which will be a road course facility that could quench some of the need for racing fans in the region. Nowadays, it's a much more crowded and acceptable scene for racing. There's Dominion Raceway in Virginia, New Jersey Motorsports Park, and the club courses of Summit Point, Monticello, and the one way out there outside of Pittsburgh. But this actually wasn't his first attempt either. Rothman was behind an early track project called Chesapeake International Raceway. First proposed around 1970, it was going to be a road course located in Elkton, Maryland, which is a little further northeast of Havre De Grace, just west of the Delaware state line. And apparently this was a very serious proposal, with this 1970 article quoting Rothman as saying that he'd already lined up a contract with USAC to hold races at the course. USAC being what is today the IndyCar Series, and also contracts with the SCCA, Trans Am, Can-Am, Continental, all the major road series at the time, and possibly even Formula One races, which was quoted in later articles. Yeah, time capsule moment here in this article from the Wilmington News Journal. NBA to add teams in Cleveland, Buffalo, Houston, and Portland. How about that? Anyway, at least at the time of this release, the track design wasn't set in stone, but it was being designed by Mark Donohue, a real big get at the time. And they're talking like all they've got to do is dot some I's and cross some T's and the track will be under construction, with the first races being held in just a year and a half. Well, obviously that never wound up getting off the ground, looking like a run of financial beefs, and then the obligatory yakety-yak backlash from local residents stalled it out. But 20-some years later, Dick Rothman is back in northeastern Maryland, and in 1994, he's sizing up the Blenheim land for a new venture, and it's going to look something like this. Maryland Motorsports Park, a $10 million, 2.5-mile road course running from the top of the property to the bottom. And I mean top to bottom. The bottom is basically sea level elevation. The whole property is what I'd call like a gently rolling series of hills upwards. They're still aiming for open wheel racing and club style stuff, but unlike the Elkton pitch, this one also has NASCAR in their sights. Seating and parking for a few thousand fans, and just about every other community function you could think of. That was their pitch to the local residents and government. They could be for concerts, festivals, car shows, jamborees, basically everything. Here's an advertisement for a meeting in January of 1995 where they list, honestly, every basic need of a town. Now, coming from the perspective of me, a race fan, it sounds like a pretty solid deal to me, and although they are promising the world, I see where they were coming from in terms of trying to appease the local officials. When you're building a road course on a piece of land, you aren't going to clear-cut the whole thing border to border and pave it over and blah blah blah. The idea typically is that it's going to be a natural setting. They were going to keep a significant portion of the property wooded and only hold races 17 days out of the year, leaving the grounds open as a public park the rest of the time. That sounds like a decent compromise to me. Hey, another time warp, this is going on the same time as the big baseball strike in '94. So this is all about as good as it gets for a racetrack proposal. They were doing all the goodwill they could, knowing that it might be an uphill battle to sell, like all racetracks are. Here's a bumper sticker that my dad says he got sometime in 1994 or 5 at the Hartford Mall, pitching support for MMP as a NASCAR track, NASCAR in '96. Now that's a little edgy because although NASCAR has a much more broader appeal to the average person or average race fan, if you're a local resident who's falling into the not in my backyard crowd, the idea of a NASCAR race and all of the possible noise and traffic and portions of society that you don't want to see is enough to get the outrage wheel rolling. And here it comes. It's CAR, Citizens Against Racing. Not to be confused with, right, racing is good for Hartford tourism, which that is a serious stretch. So late 1994 and 95 looked like it was filled with a whole lot of back and forth between the developers, pitching all the good they were after, and groups like CAR banging the drum of how this would be the end of Havre De Grace and your lifestyle as you know it. So was there any truth behind their outrage? Because you know it was going to be coming. It starts up anytime there's a racetrack proposal, stadium proposal, really, actually anything at all in a lot of parts of the country. There was a development about a mile northeast of the track that was built sometime around 1991, it looks like. There's Chapel Road to the north, which has a couple of houses on it. And then underneath of the property is Route 40, which I don't think anyone is going to argue is some kind of civic prize. Even today, it's a highway of commercial, industrial, kind of anything goes properties with a rail line above it and another below it. The actual city is a couple of miles away. Now, there may have been a point with noise complaints in regards to the city. Like I said, the property sort of all cascades downwards, and downwards, sort of, is Havre De Grace. Of course, they also have a US highway running through it, the Amtrak line running through it, a freight line running through it, and the nearby Aberdeen Proving Grounds military complex, which basically, still to this day, just blows stuff up. So they're not completely isolated and immune to any outside noise. The quote from the track was, "Sound mitigation measures and proper contouring of the site will reduce sound emissions emanating from the property." Which I guess just means they're going to leave tree buffers in place. I don't know how much else they could do outside of like building gigantic highway walls. The lines in the sand had been drawn. The task force's noise report was released in December by George Azar Garanther, an acoustics research engineer. He said that depending on wind conditions, the track could bombard Havre De Grace residents with noise ranging from moderate to severe. And this, of course, went against the Rothman sound report, which said sound from the racetrack could be reduced. So, of course, the truth is probably somewhere in between. You can get past that, possibly, but the truth of the matter is that none of the back and forth between cranky residents and developers matters quite as much as what the relationship is between the developers and the actual community leaders. This wasn't working in favor of Rothman and company. Yeah, there were some locals who have been speaking favorably of the project, with good petitions, this, that, and the other, but the louder voices had the ears of local officials. Like here, no to racetrack, bad racetrack. There's Harry Korch quoted here, who says that he's traveled to Europe to watch Grand Prix events and just plunked down $125 to go watch NASCAR at Dover. I would love to see a racing facility built, but not in my backyard, he said. Well, there it is. Mr. Krieger here is in favor of growth and possible benefits, but it looks like he's on an island. The Havre De Grace mayor and the Hartford County executive both here say that they aren't supporting it, and 5 of 7 council members don't either. The people don't want it, the mayor says. They don't want traffic, they don't want noise, they don't think it's a good fit. And that's pretty much the ballgame and a wrap on the track. If there's no one in the committee who is either a racing fan or understood what the concept was, it's a very black and white image of what a good development is and what bad development is. And without any voice in the conversation, racetracks will always fall into the categories of bad developments. And in May of 1995, Rothman withdraws his bid for the land purchase, takes his ball, and goes on elsewhere. And the farm property? Well, that's where I am today, taking a drive through to show what's become of it in its second life. Later on in 1995, local officials find a project that they decide is worth pursuing. Ed Abel, a Pennsylvania businessman, comes forward with a pleasing plan. It's going to see the farm developed into a pair of championship golf courses. The county executive is quoted here in October as saying the golf courses have the potential to be a tourism draw, and a much better alternative than the dreaded 1,000 units of residential development that she had feared. And even the woman behind CAR seems good with it. Well, the thing with being in the not in my backyard crowd and getting choosy with what you want land to be developed as means that oftentimes you don't get your way in the end. You know, for instance, there's a big plot of land around here that years back was going to be developed into a Walmart, the ultimate evil. Well, that was shouted down, but since the land is still zoned as such, now it's going to be a big commercial and retail center, which is still apparently the end of local society and civilization as we know it. They did build the golf course, and by all accounts, it's beautiful and a fantastic course to play. I'm going to be driving through it in just a minute. They also built a lot of houses. A lot of houses. The plan bloomed into an enormous residential community called Bully Rock, which was going to wrap around both of the golf courses. They built the first course, but they never did build the second. And even as of 2022, the current year, they still haven't finished building up all the housing and connecting all of the streets and pathways. The golf course was designed to host professional level touring events. And they did. It held 5 LPGA Tour events in the mid-2000s. But despite drawing around 92,000 fans for the 2007 tournament, a few more than a racetrack would have, it failed to take traction among pros and among players. Ironically, there were mentions of noise complaints, that the houses and the kids playing outside of them are distracting. Go figure. So would the racetrack have been successful if it was built? Would they have followed through on all of their promises and pledges? Would it have seen top-level racing and established itself as an iconic American course? Who knows? It's a chapter of local history that's really gone by the wayside and lost. I hadn't even heard of it until just a few years ago when I saw the bumper sticker. But driving through the hills of the golf course today, I can't help but wonder what could have been and try to imagine and picture race cars zooming around the hills. So I'll leave you the video and let you try and imagine what could have been for yourself. A NASCAR never.